At the crossroads of Europe and Asia, Hagia Sophia rises as a monument that seems to defy every limit. Its dome, nearly 32 meters wide, reaches a height of 56.6 meters, about the height of a 17-story building. Around its base, 40 windows create a glowing ring of light, making thousands of tons of brick and stone appear almost weightless. For nearly 1,500 years, Hagia Sophia has witnessed the rise of Byzantium, the fall of Constantinople, and many powerful earthquakes. Every crack tells a piece of history, and every layer of material carries the mark of a different era. So how did Byzantine architects place a massive circular dome over a square plan and control the outward forces that could tear the walls apart? Join Mandarin Tech as we uncover the engineering secrets hidden beneath centuries of history. The name Hagia Sophia comes from Greek and means holy wisdom, standing beside the Bosphorus Strait. The monument seen today is actually the third structure built on the same site. For nearly 1,500 years, it served as a Byzantine cathedral, a Catholic church during the Latin period, an Ottoman mosque from 1453, a museum from 1935, and once again, a place of worship in 2020. Its history began in 360, when Emperor Constantius I opened a large church in the center of Constantinople. The first building is believed to have followed a Roman basilica plan, with rows of columns supporting a wooden roof. The interior was spacious, but highly vulnerable to fire. In 404, the exile of Patriarch John Chrysostom triggered riots. Flames spread through the city center and destroyed the church. In 415, Emperor Theodosius I built a replacement with 5 aisles and a massive marble entrance. Remains of this second church still lie in front of Hagia Sophia. During excavations in 1935, archaeologists discovered steps, column bases, and stone blocks carved with sheep about 2 meters below the present ground level. They show how each new structure rose directly over the ruins of the previous one. In January 532, the blue and green chariot racing factions joined forces during the Nika riots. Constantinople burned, and the second church was destroyed. Justinian I refused to rebuild the old design. Within weeks, he ordered a larger and taller cathedral covered by a gigantic dome. The challenge was now to place a circular dome over a square plan without tearing the structure apart. Justinian I entrusted the project to Anthemius of Tralles and Isidore of Miletus. Both were skilled in mathematics, geometry, and mechanics, and understood how to place a circular dome over a square plan while keeping the supporting structure stable. According to traditional records, construction began in 532 with around 10,000 workers. Thin bricks reduced the weight of the roof, while thick mortar helped adjust each layer of masonry. After 5 years and 10 months, Hagia Sophia was inaugurated in December 537. Its greatest achievement was the way forces moved through the structure. Gravity traveled along the curved dome mainly as compression before reaching its base. There, the load split in 2 directions, one downward and the other outward. 4 pendentives solved the most difficult transition. They filled the space between the circular dome and the square plan, collected the load around the dome's base, and transferred it into 4 massive arches and then into 4 large piers below. Along the east-west axis, 2 semi-domes absorbed outward thrust and passed it to smaller semi-domes. Along the north-south axis, the main arches and piers resisted sideways movement, but brick and mortar are strong under compression and weak under tension. If a pier shifts or an arch deforms, the dome's base can lose its shape and cracks may form. Hagia Sophia survives because all these elements hold one another in balance. Earthquakes can disturb that balance and expose its weakest points. Hagia Sophia's structural balance lasted for only about 2 decades. An earthquake in 553 weakened the eastern arch, and another in 557 widened the cracks. On May 7, 558, part of the eastern semi-dome and a section of the central dome collapsed into the sanctuary. The shallow dome created strong horizontal thrust, while the rapid construction placed extra stress on the structure. Isidore the Younger was assigned to rebuild it. He removed weakened masonry, repaired the supporting arches, and built a new dome about 6.2 meters higher. Its steeper curve directed more of the load downward into the piers, while 40 ribs divided the dome into more stable sections. The work was completed in 562. In 989, another earthquake destroyed the western arch and part of the adjoining dome. Armenian architect Tredat restored the area by 994. In 1344, another earthquake weakened the eastern side, and 2 years later, parts of the arch and dome collapsed again. Hagia Sophia reopened only in 1354. By the 16th century, Mimar Sinan had added massive exterior buttresses to support leaning walls and prevent the piers from spreading apart. During the 1847-1849 restoration, the Fossati brothers corrected 12 leaning columns, added tie rods to the north-south arches, and reinforced the dome with 2 iron chains. Hagia Sophia is the result of repeated collapse, repair, and reinforcement. After every failure, people found a new way to keep it standing. In the past, Hagia Sophia was reinforced only after damage had already occurred. Today, engineers must prepare for an earthquake that has not yet happened, one that could come from a fault building up energy beneath the Sea of Marmara. The North Anatolian Fault stretches for more than 1,000 kilometers, separating the Anatolian Plate from the Eurasian Plate. Locked sections continue to accumulate stress. The most dangerous area lies beneath the seafloor, only about 20 kilometers south of Istanbul. On August 17, 1999, the magnitude 7.4 Izmit earthquake ruptured about 145 kilometers of the fault. More than 17,000 people were killed, nearly 44,000 were injured, and over 250,000 lost their homes. Hagia Sophia remains standing but suffered small cracks and mosaic damage. On April 23, 2025, a magnitude 6.2 earthquake shook Istanbul. Its epicenter was about 60 kilometers away and nearly 10 kilometers deep. 13 minutes later, a magnitude 5.3 tremor struck farther south, activating about 20 kilometers of the fault. 20 years of data show seismic activity moving eastward toward the locked section south of Istanbul, which has not produced a major earthquake since 1766. GFC warns that accumulated stress could trigger an earthquake up to magnitude 7.4. For Hagia Sophia, even small movements can spread through its arches, piers, and dome. Engineers must therefore measure invisible shifts to understand how close the structure may be to its limits. Because Hagia Sophia has been altered, repaired, and reinforced many times, looking at its surface alone cannot reveal how the entire structure is carrying its loads. Engineers therefore need to turn the monument into something that can be measured, monitored, and tested without putting the real heritage site at risk. In 2020, laser scanners went deep underground and mapped about 936 meters of wells, corridors, and underground chambers in 3 dimensions. By matching this data with the floor plan above, specialists could identify voids near the foundations, water channels, and areas with unusual ground conditions. Earlier vibration studies recorded fundamental frequencies of about 2.12 Hz along the north-south axis and 1.87 Hz east-west. This difference shows that the building's stiffness is not evenly distributed, meaning different parts may react differently during an earthquake. In a separate experiment, engineer Ezer Sakta's team built a 1/26 scale model of Hagia Sophia's main structural core, weighing about 7 tons. It reproduced the central dome, 4 main arches, 4 massive piers, and 2 semi-domes. Sensors were placed in positions corresponding to those used on the real building before the model was placed on a shaking table. At that time, a magnitude 3.6 earthquake struck near Istanbul. Signals recorded from both the real monument and the model showed similar vibration patterns, helping researchers confirm the model's reliability. The shaking table then recreated the magnitude 7.4 Izmit earthquake of 1999. Because of the smaller scale, the shaking lasted only about 3 seconds. The model survived the first test with almost no damage. Researchers then increased acceleration to 2.2 G and repeated several extreme tests. Only after 15 tests did the central dome collapse. Slow-motion footage showed the semi-domes gradually separating while the main arches lost their ability to support the roof. The results do not mean the real Hagia Sophia would collapse in exactly the same way. Instead, they reveal possible failure sequences and help engineers decide what should be reinforced, monitored, or left unchanged before restoration work begins. Based on the weaknesses already identified, Hagia Sophia entered one of its largest restoration campaigns in more than 150 years in April 2025. The main focus is the central dome, the semi-domes, and the minarets, which are critical to the building's ability to survive future earthquakes. The first challenge was at floor level. To bring heavy machinery inside without damaging the marble floor, engineers used radar scans and load tests. The floor could support about 25 tons per square meter, while the temporary route was designed for 30 tons. Even though the heaviest vehicle weighs 45 tons, a multi-layer floor system reduces the pressure to about 6 tons per square meter. Workers covered the ancient marble with protective layers, creating a temporary construction road through the interior. Inside, 4 43.5-meter steel columns support a working platform near the dome. Outside, a 41-meter tower crane with a 60-meter boom lifts equipment while prayers and visits continue below. By July 2026, a temporary steel frame around the dome was being covered with fire-resistant sheeting. This allows old lead panels to be removed section by section so the brickwork can be inspected and repaired. At the same time, the upper part of the northeastern minaret was carefully dismantled. A total of 411 stone blocks and 26 stair courses were numbered, treated, and reinstalled where possible. The work was completed in April 2026. The campaign has no fixed end date because hidden damage only becomes visible once the lead covering is removed. Beneath it lies an even more fragile layer, mosaics that can detach because of small changes in moisture or vibration. Once the core structure is stabilized, conservation work turns to a fragile heritage layer only a few centimeters thick. The surviving brilliant surfaces of Hagia Sophia still hold millions of tiny tesserae. Each mosaic was pressed by hand into wet mortar. In the golden areas, a thin metal leaf was sealed between 2 layers of glass. Byzantine craftsmen deliberately set the pieces at slightly different angles. This visual technique makes light bounce across the surface, causing the interior to change with every step. Across the dome, mosaics from different centuries exist side by side. Modern restoration, therefore, requires specialists to map the boundaries between historical periods before any intervention, preventing the accidental removal of original heritage. The most destructive enemy is invisible. Moisture carries dissolved salts through the mortar. As it dries, salt crystals expand, turning the surface into powder and pushing material outward. Ancient metal nails also swell as they rust, becoming wedges that can tear mosaic sections apart. Emergency conservation must be carried out millimeter by millimeter. Loose tesserae are temporarily secured, compatible mortar is injected into empty spaces, and corroded nails are removed. Under UNESCO's strict warnings about moisture control, the greatest success may simply be preventing even one more tessera from falling to the ground. The value of Hagia Sophia goes far beyond that of a religious building. As early as the 6th century, its enormous central space, connected dome system, and masterful use of light created a new architectural standard. This model spread to many Eastern churches and strongly influenced architecture across Europe and the Near East. After 1453, Ottoman architects studied the structure, adjusted its proportions, and developed the idea of a centralized interior in mosques such as Slimaniye, Selimiye, and Sultan Ahmed. In this way, a Byzantine achievement became an important source of inspiration for Islamic architecture and helped shape Istanbul's distinctive skyline. Inside Hagia Sophia, Christian mosaics, the mihrab, pulpit, Arabic calligraphy, and 4 minarets record different periods of power, faith, and artistic taste. The building is like a historical document written directly into its materials, with every change of function leaving a visible trace. This layering makes conservation especially sensitive. Returning Hagia Sophia to only one historical state would mean erasing the periods that came later. The task of restoration is therefore to preserve these different layers so that each can still be recognized without damaging the others. In 1985, Hagia Sophia was included in the historic areas of Istanbul on the UNESCO World Heritage List. UNESCO recognizes it as an architectural masterpiece and an exceptional example of the long cultural encounter between Europe and Asia. From Sultanahmet Square, Hagia Sophia may look like an ancient dome quietly overlooking Istanbul. But inside, it has fought gravity, earthquakes, water, and time for nearly 1,500 years. Every brick, buttress, and mosaic carries the mark of damage and survival. Byzantine builders created its daring structure. Ottoman architects strengthened it, and modern technology now monitors its smallest movements. Hagia Sophia has survived not because it never failed, but because people always found a way to rebuild it. What saved Hagia Sophia? The original design or centuries of restoration? Share your thoughts, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Mandarin Tech.